Lianne found love during the COVID-19 pandemic, or so she thought. Soon into the relationship, the cracks began to show and his mask started to fall off, and Lianne was living a nightmare. This week, Lianne shares her incredible survivor story and the long journey of self-love and healing that she's been on ever since. This episode contains discussions of domestic violence and does include some strong language. Listener discretion is advised. I'm your host, Dashanka, and you're listening to That Was the Moment I Knew I Had to Leave If I Wanted to Live. My guest today is Lianne Torres. Lianne is a podcaster, speaker, and domestic violence advocate. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, she found herself in a physically and emotionally abusive relationship that almost ended her life. After escaping from that situation, she noticed a trend. The common denominator in every single relationship was her. She realized it was time to begin healing those deep-rooted wounds that had been left unhealed for so long. Thank you so much for joining me today, Lianne, and sharing your story.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm hoping I can reach at least one person with my story.
Amazing. Yeah, and that's my aim of the podcast, just helping at least one person and giving them hope. So do you want to tell me what life was like before your moment?
How much time do we have? No, I mean, honestly, and I had this thought the other day. I was in my room just thinking about who I was when I was in that relationship during the COVID pandemic, and even the girl that I was compared to the woman that I am now. It's such a 180. But who I was back then was a really insecure, really codependent woman who didn't know what it meant to have genuine, real love in her life because she didn't have that for herself. And that's truly why I believe now, being on my healing journey and doing a lot of the inner work since leaving that relationship, I had no relationship with myself and I settled for so much mediocrity, so much disrespect, so much bullshit when it came to being in these types of relationships. And really at the core of all of it is because I didn't know who I was and I didn't value who I was. So it was a really dark time for me, even before the physical abuse happened. And I'm sure we're going to get into it as the conversation progresses. But I was just really someone who hated, who loathed at the thought of being alone. And if I had some sort of male attention in my life, no matter how shitty it was, I was going to hold on to it for dear life because I didn't want to be alone, because I didn't know how to be alone.
You've touched on a couple of really important points, and I know I can certainly relate, and I'm sure many listeners can too, that any attention is good attention, and it's not. And I've also spoken with other guests on the show, and we've talked about when we don't feel fulfilled or worthy ourselves, we tend to then look for love outside of us. And so we think, oh, if I get that job, I'm going to be happy. If I get that relationship, he's going to love me, or she's going to love me, or whoever, and then I'm going to be happy, then I'm going to be fulfilled, my life is going to be great. You're trying to get to that destination, but actually you forget that regardless of where you go, you're taking you with you.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me now, okay, let's get to the moment.
Yeah. The moment leading up to, or the moment that everything happened?
However you want to describe it.
Yeah, no problem. And I just want to touch on what you said before I do that. I worked with a life coach. Shout out to Erica Kramer. She's also based out of Australia, the Queen of Confidence. And I was in her coaching program during the beginning of my personal development journey after leaving that relationship. And she talked about that when I lose the weight, then I'll be happy. It's such a fucked up mentality that a lot of us deal with, that I still deal with too. I think it's important for us to enjoy the journey and stop focusing so much on the end destination, because that can change. We have no control over that. Only thing that we can control is ourselves. So just want to put that out there.
Beautifully, beautifully said.
Yes. So yeah, my story, I have the full in-depth story if anyone wants to listen to it, and we'll link it in the show notes on my podcast. It's episode 12, which tells you everything from beginning to end. I go into very, very graphic detail, so I do want to put a trigger warning out for anyone who listens to it. But it was a very short-lived relationship. Like I said, I met him, it was the end of April 2020, so right when the world shut down. I was living in Florida, and for people who know Florida during that time, there was really no shutdown. Like, people were just living their lives regardless, which is a fucking mess, but that's besides the point. But in the beginning, it was the most beautiful relationship that I ever found myself in. I have had a history of pretty toxic relationships, that some were physically abusive. I didn't realize it then that I was in a domestic violence relationship, but I just had this really shitty timetable of just shitty relationship after shitty relationship, and that's what I kept attracting. And lo and behold, I attracted the same type of person in a different body, but I didn't realize it back then. There's this really trendy word nowadays called love bombing, which is something I knew nothing about until after leaving and after really diving deep into the world of domestic violence, because I was very unknown to that world. That's only something that I saw on TV, something that it happened to them, but not me, right? So in the beginning, it was rainbows and butterflies. It was very lust driven. It was very much finding that companion to like lock down with because I didn't want to be alone. And I really didn't get to know him on a deeper level. It was very much a physical type of relationship. But again, I was very low vibrational, very like, this is the most beautiful man I've ever met in my life. I'm not going to let him go. He pretended to be Prince Charming. He said all the right things. He did all the right things. But slowly as time went on, I want to say maybe 6 months into the relationship, we were only together for 10 months, so it was very short-lived. But about 5-6 months into the relationship, that's when the shift started to happen. That's when he started to get mad a little bit quicker. That's when he started to raise his voice. That's when he started to call me names. When it used to be baby, now it's bitch, like things like that. And I shared this because when it comes to being in these types of abusive relationships, society tends to think that it's only one type, which is the person is putting their hands on you, whether it's a man or a woman, whatever gender. But for this conversation, it's going to be him, the perpetrator, and me, female victim. And it didn't start off with him just physically abusing me. It didn't start off with him putting his hands on me. It was very slow. It was very calculated. It was a lot of lying, a lot of manipulation, a lot of cheating. There was so much infidelity that I found out about towards the end of the relationship, but it just got worse and worse. And it got to the point that I want to say it was the last month of our relationship is when the physical abuse happened. And trigger warning, I'm going to put it out there now, but he put his hands on my face and he squeezed it so hard that I couldn't brush my teeth for the next couple of days because that's how hard that he squeezed it. And the first time that happened, I was like, what the fuck? Like, this has never happened to me before. Like, no one has ever put their hands on me like this before. And that should have been the only time, but it wasn't. And it progressed from there with the physical abuse until the night of March 12th, 2021. Where he almost killed me. And again, I talk about it in full detail on my podcast episode, but that night got so violent to the point that he told me straight to my face, you're not going to make it out of this apartment alive. And in that moment, I believe in God, whatever you guys believe in. I definitely believe in a higher power, but there was a higher power with me that night that told me, if you do not get out right now in this moment, you're not going to make it out. And I listened to that intuition, that inner knowing, that inner voice that a lot of us have. And that's what really started the whole journey of me starting from a rock bottom. I went to my best friend's apartment. She was the reason why I called 911. He's now in prison for what he did. Long story short, again, I talk about it on the podcast episode. But yeah, it was the most traumatizing thing that I've ever gone through in my life that I'm still dealing with and healing from going on 3 years later. So yeah, it's been a journey. Wow. Yeah, I need some water for that.
Yeah, I need a couple of deep breaths.
Yeah.
That sounds so intense. And it sounds like he, at the beginning, like it's easier to put on a face to start with, but the masks, the glue starts coming off, the mask starts falling down eventually. And did he have a history of violence before, or did you have any idea of his past relationships?
So this is another red flag that I want to put out there that I learned about. If he or she talks so badly about their ex, that is a red flag. And why do I say that? And to answer your question, I did not know until after I left, and I'll get into how I found that out. But in the beginning, of course, when you're meeting someone, you bring up the ex, you talk about your past a little bit, and everything that he told me about his last relationship, he hated her, she was the devil, she was the reason why his life was a mess and why he, left where he was and started over. The worst woman ever. He painted this picture of her being this monster. And then 6-7 months into the relationship, I found out that he was cheating on me with her. But wait, it gets better. Gets to the point that he ends up wanting to be in a polygamous relationship with me and her, and we can all just be this throuple living happily ever after. I cannot make this shit up, y'all. Like, I swear, it sounds like a Lifetime movie.
Like, I know I'm laughing, and
yeah,
I mean
no,
you
no.
absolutely no disrespect, but I think if that
None
happened
taken.
to me, I'd be like, what the actual fuck?
Yeah,
like,
no, literally, what the actual fuck? And I did try it because the girl back then was so desperate to not let him go that she can't be the one to win him. Like, I'm gonna be the one. Safe to say it didn't work out. And she did end up leaving and going back to their home state. But yeah, he made it seem, like you said, he had this mask on. He made it seem like he was this angel. He had a really rough life growing up, but he grew out of that. He was older than me. He was 6-7 years older than me. So, and I was 32 at the time. So he was pretty much up there. And I was like, oh, he's grown. He got his shit together. No, it was all bullshit. It was all a lie. And afterwards, I found out because my sister, shout out to her, she ran a background check on him after he was already locked up. Dating back to 2007, he's been in and out of the prison system, multiple felonies of domestic violence, of drugs, of just a habitual offender who's done this over and over and over. And I had no fucking clue about it. He was very secretive with his life, and I didn't know a lot about him until after I was no longer with him. But yeah, this is something that he's done and he probably will do again, unfortunately.
And were there any other red flags that, I know like hindsight's a great thing because you can see that actually that was a red flag, but I also like, I don't want to talk about red flags as in you missed this, you should have seen this, because I think sometimes it's like you don't know that they're red flags until you're out.
I definitely had on those rose-colored glasses that people say. I was blinded by, I don't even want to say love. I was blinded by lust. And I was blinded by not wanting to be alone and just finding this man so physically attractive. Like, I felt like he was out of my league. And I was like, I had this mindset of like, I'm not good enough. Like, why me? And because I lived in that such low confidence state, anything that happened, whether it was the cheating, whether it was the sneaking around, whether it was calling me out of my name, the anger issues, anything like that, like I just pretended like it wasn't there. But there was definitely things in the beginning. I mean, he told me the second day that we met that he was in a gang. And I never grew up in that type of world. I don't know anything about that. Complete polar opposites of his upbringing and my upbringing, and we just were not compatible. But again, because I was so low vibrational in how I felt about myself, I wasn't gonna let him go because I found him so physically attractive.
And do you think that the pandemic had anything to do with it as well? Because there was so much fear mongering around that time. And you did mention earlier you didn't want to be alone. Do you think the pandemic had anything to do with it?
1%. There was no way that I was going to go on lockdown by myself. I had recently moved from my home state to Florida, so I was on my own. My sister lived out there, but at the time she was married, she had her whole life, and I wasn't going to impose myself in her world. So before I even met him, like I was just dating on the apps, casually seeing people, like just not wanting to be alone. And then when the pandemic hit and I found him, I'm like, oh, this is perfect. I have someone that I can shack up with and he can help with bills and I don't have to be struggling on my own anymore. I do have a daughter, but she wasn't living with me at the time. She was in my home state. And it was just such a lonely feeling for everyone, right? So I think that played into my advantage, if you will, being with him during that time. But like we said before, he could only pretend to be someone he wasn't for so long. And it turned my world upside down.
Okay, so we've got to, you called 911 on him, and what happens next?
That night, I went to my best friend's apartment. She had no idea, and I want to say this, no one in my life knew that I was in an abusive relationship, and that's something that happens a lot with victims of domestic violence. There's a lot of isolation, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of embarrassment, and the person makes you feel like if you say something, something's bad is going to happen, right? So when I got to her apartment, it was like in the middle of the night, and luckily he didn't know where she lived. So that's why I went to her apartment compared to my sister, because he knew where she lived. So I got there, I'm banging on her door, and she opens up and she sees me, and I look like hell. Like, I've been through hell, right? And that was the first time that I told her what was going on. And I was like, he's gonna kill me. You need to help me. And I wasn't gonna call 9 because I was so scared. And she was like, no, Lianne, you have to call 9. Something needs to happen. So I did. And then the very next day, he ended up getting arrested. That I found out through the police station. And then my sister booked me a one-way ticket back home to my home state. And that was the start of everything for me. In the process, I lost my car. I lost my apartment that I was living in. I lost my job. I lost my health insurance, my unemployment money. Like, literally, I hit rock bottom, right? But I truly feel like this was needed for me it was the wake-up call that I needed in order to really make a serious change in my life. Because like I said before, I've been in really toxic relationships over and over, but I wasn't changing anything about me. Like, I came to the realization, like you said in my intro, the common denominator in every single one of these relationships was Lianne. And going through something like this where I almost lost my life, I really took a step back and I was like, what the fuck? Like, what is going on? You're 32 years old and this is your life? Like, this is what's happening right now? What are we doing? So I started my personal development journey. I started going to therapy, group therapy and individual therapy. I worked with life coaches. I cried a lot. I was depressed. I had all of these feelings, but it was really the shift that I felt like I needed in order to build myself back up slowly but surely.
Yeah. And so what are some of the things that you kind of worked on to yourself? Were there any exercises or tools that you used that really helped you along the way?
Yeah. The most important thing that I started with me was accountability. And that's something that I talk a lot about on my platform, was not taking responsibility on what he did, because that's his problem. That was his choice. I did not deserve that. What my role was me allowing this to continue to happen over and over and not walking away and feeling like this was acceptable behavior to deal with. And why did I feel that way? That was really where the help came in, working with the life coaches, working with the therapist. Shout out to Dr. Lambert. Anytime I'm able to shout him out, I will, because being in a safe space with a man, that really, really changed my life. And him holding my hand essentially and allowing me to break down to him, to cry in front of him, to share all of my really fucked up feelings that I had, and not having that judgment or that shame placed on me that I had when I was in that relationship and relationships prior. But me really being able to talk about it and use my voice to gain my power back. And that's really in the journey of me healing and doing all that work is why I started my podcast. Few months after that. In the beginning, I definitely secluded myself. I went into my cocoon. I didn't want to be seen. I deleted all my social media because I was terrified that he was going to find me. Luckily, that didn't happen. But as the healing progressed and I found the strength and was able to talk more freely and openly about it, I was like, I have a story to tell. I'm good at talking and I'm going to start a podcast. And I started it on January 1st of 2020 by sharing that story, by sharing other life experiences, by just using my voice to get it out there. And my podcast has been such a huge part of my healing, to be able to talk about the shit that I went through, and I survived it for a reason. And I want to help others know that despite what I've gone through, look at me now, and that can be you too.
That is so inspiring. And
Thank you.
yeah, and I love that. I totally believe in, well, I'm doing a podcast, so I believe in the power of sharing stories. And yeah, and I think talking about your experiences is healing in itself. In another episode I recorded with a woman who was attacked and left for dead, her advice to people is like, talk to anyone, talk to yourself, talk to your dog, talk to your cat. But it's that just releasing it from within rather than just holding it in. And I think also when you share your story, you give other people the permission to share their story, which is really important for people to do.
Yeah.
And what's the response been like about the podcast?
It's been insane, and in the best way. Let me say that. When I started sharing my story publicly, of course I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to talk about something so personal, so life altering, so traumatic. Like, going through something like this, it's a huge trauma that I've been through, right? And at first I was very nervous and scared and being like, like, what's going to be the response? And it blew my mind on how supportive people have been, people that I knew or that I know in my real physical life, but also the amount of feedback that I've gotten from strangers on the internet. I mean, that's how me and you were able to connect, right? It's just, it blows my mind that there's so many of us who have gone through or know someone who's going through or have lost someone, unfortunately, to domestic violence, but we don't talk about it enough. We only talk about it one time a year in October for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. But no, this is something that is happening every single fucking day of every single minute. Like, we know the statistics. I'm in America, but 1 in 3 women are a victim of DV in their lifetime. Like that, it blows my mind of how many of us are going through it. But why are we not talking about it? Why is there such a stigma behind it? Why is it so hush hush? Oh no, that's her problem. That's his problem. That's their business. I'm not going to get involved. No, that is a part of the fucking problem. That's why the abuse is continuing to happen, because there's such a stigma around it. So me being the woman that I am that survived through it, I wholeheartedly believe that I survived that night for a reason, because I was this close. I'm telling you, I was this close to not making it out. And I was able to come out of it. I feel like it's a duty within me to show others you can come out on the other side of it. It's not fucking easy. Let me just say that right now. It's not rainbows and butterflies. And I know I may sound very strong and very like great now, but there's still moments that I struggle. There's still moments where I have flashbacks. I was diagnosed with PTSD and I still do have triggers and moments that I deal with. But like I said, I just survived for a reason, and I'm gonna talk about it until I can't anymore. And I'm gonna talk about this all year round, not just 1 month out of the year.
So what sort of things did you do to kind of work on your self-worth? Because when we have bad relationships, it usually stems from lack of self-love, lack of self-worth. What did you do to kind of booster those areas of your life?
What I'm still doing, because this is a lifelong journey, right? This is not, I'll never say that I'm healed. I'm always healing.
Okay.
But honestly, the biggest thing for me is being single and being celibate. I have been single, not dating, not having sex, nothing with anyone since March 12th, 2021, since I left that relationship. And I've been just so focused on getting to know Lianne by herself on such a deep personal level, like learning to fall in love with myself, taking myself out on dates, doing things that make me happy, like just really pouring into me instead of putting all of my attention and energy on other people who didn't serve me at that time. Like when I do decide to go back out there into the dating world, I know I'm going to show up as a completely different person, because the relationship that I have with myself now is so much more secure than it was back then. So the biggest thing for me that I'm still doing is just like working on me, like loving on me, getting to know me, and just having me be top priority, because I never was before ever in my life, and being comfortable with my own company. I think that's been the biggest shift and change for me. Like I said before, I was very codependent, hated being alone. And now, oh my God, it's gotten to the point that if you are gonna cause any type of stress or wrinkle in my face, like I'm not fucking dealing with you. And I'm leaving when I see an orange flag, not even letting it get to red. You know what I mean?
I'm laughing because I know exactly what you mean. And I was single for almost 8 years. I went on dates and stuff, but it would only be a first date because I was like, what? No, I'm sorry. I've moved on. I've grown. I've healed. But I also realized that as my self-love grew, the people I was attracting and being attracted to had changed as well. And those same people, old, unhealed me, would have fallen at their feet. And said, oh my God, yes, how lucky am I? And now I'm like, you are absolutely gorgeous, but you're just not for me. The healing is actually, it's working. You're not repeating cycles.
Absolutely.
And can we just talk about, you said at the beginning that domestic violence was never anything in your life. Speaking from experience, we mimic our relationships to either our mother or father in future relationships, right? So was there any of that happening for you? Or could you see any?
No. And I love that you asked that, because I've interviewed several different survivors of domestic violence on my own podcast. And I asked them that question too. What was life like for you growing up? Did you have domestic violence in your home? Did you see that? Did you witness it? Some people say yes. yes, some people say no. And that's the thing with domestic violence. Like, it can happen to anyone. Just because you grew up in a violent home doesn't necessarily mean that you will repeat the same pattern, but there is a higher possibility that if you grow up in toxicity, that's going to be the norm for you. So maybe you're going to repeat that in the future. But for me, I mean, my parents are high school sweethearts. They're 42nd anniversary is actually tomorrow, which is crazy.
That's amazing.
Came from the islands in Puerto Rico, and never ever saw my dad hit my mom hit my dad, like nothing like that. Of course, they had regular arguments as any couples do, but I never grew up in a home where it was toxic and violent and just chaotic. I did not. I had a very normal upbringing, normal, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But it was just something that was very foreign to me. Like I said before, it's something that I saw on TV shows, on movies, but it was something that's never going to happen to me. There's no fucking way. But lo and behold, it did.
I think that's a really important point because, yeah, I didn't grow up with domestic violence, and I do say to myself, oh, it'll never happen to me, because the second you raise a hand, I'm out. And
I said that too.
Yeah. And I guess until you're in that situation, you can't actually say that's how I'm going to behave, because you're not living it.
Yep.
And so tell me, what's life like for you now?
So peaceful. Life is very quiet, which I enjoy. I'm just so grateful. And it may sound so weird to some people to say that, like, I'm grateful for what I went through. I could have gone without almost losing my life. I didn't need that trauma. But honestly, being on the other side now and being able to have learned from that experience and not repeat the cycle again, I'm just absolutely grateful for everything that I've gone through, good, bad, and shitty, because it has truly made me into such a strong, powerful, resilient woman that I didn't even know I had this within me. And I don't think I would have been able to find that within myself had I not gone through what I went through. So for that, I'm grateful. But life now, I mean, I'm just focusing on my podcast. I'm focusing on speaking out, on sharing my story even more and sharing other people's stories. And life is good. I can't complain at all. Sometimes it does get a little lonely. I would like to have a significant other in my life, but honestly, there's still some trauma when it comes to that. There's still trust issues that I have. I don't want to say that like every man is guilty until they prove themselves innocent, but I'm definitely weary when it comes to, I never want to go through something like this again. So I'm going to protect my peace as much as I can. And if and when it's meant to happen, that's great, but I'm not actively going to be searching for it. I'm just so focused on Lianne right now that I don't have energy for anything else in this moment.
You're giving yourself this space, this time, building that trust again. Yeah, that's going to be...
It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
And not just trusting a man, but trusting yourself to go into a relationship and not lose yourself again.
Yes, exactly. Because I definitely lost myself, not in just that relationship and other relationships. I don't want to repeat the cycle. I don't want to fall into the same toxicity that I'm so used to. You know, it takes a while for you to unlearn the bad habits and unlearn the familiarity that you're so used to, right? So I'm not in a rush. I'm definitely not in a rush. But if it happens, hey, I am single.
Yeah. You can find her details in the show notes.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, and I think also an important part to remember about like when we've been through any traumas, like our nervous system feels safe in that because it's known.
It's what we know.
So yeah, it's what you know. So it's very interesting, like going into a new relationship. When you start dating someone that is totally different, I'm speaking from experience here, you start thinking, oh, this doesn't feel right, because why is my body not having these severe reactions or like those high highs, low lows that you are used to in a toxic relationship?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have found myself thinking, is something wrong with this relationship because it is so balanced? And it didn't feel like any of my other relationships.
That is so interesting. And I hear about that a lot, especially for people who have gone through really toxic relationships. I know there's only so much healing that I can do on my own. There's definitely another world of healing that's going to come when I do find that person. And even when I do decide to just like start dating, right? But it's super interesting that we're so used to well, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but I'm so used to the toxic bullshit. So like when things are calm and nothing's happening, it's like, am I going to start looking for a problem? Like, you know what I mean? Like, am I going to start making up scenarios that don't even fucking exist?
I'm going to help you out there. Initially, yes.
Yeah.
Initially, you're going to be like, hey, I'm used to drama. I need a bit of drama here. Otherwise,
I'm bored.
Do you even like me if there's no drama?
Right. God.
Yeah, and that happens. And for me, that's been something that I've had to work through, because it's reminding myself that this person is like no other person I've ever dated, which is exactly what I need.
Right.
And that's why things feel different.
That's why I said I'm not ready. I'm not ready to deal with that shit.
But I think it's also about choosing the right person that you can explain, hey, this is why I did that.
Yeah.
And having that person that is open to understanding and wanting to understand you. It's easier said than done.
Right. But if you're up for the challenge, my info is in the show notes. I'm just kidding.
We've now become a dating show too.
Yes.
And so what kind of advice would you give to someone that might be going through it or knows someone that's going through it? I know it's a hard thing when you know something's happening to someone because you can't do it for them. You can't leave for them. What advice would you give?
Yeah. So I'll give advice to both sides. I'll start off with the people on the outside looking in. My piece of advice is, especially if you know someone who's gone and come back and on that cycle, a lot of the times the numbers that are out there, it takes an average of 7 times until a person who's dealing with an abusive relationship to leave permanently. So being an outsider looking in, I would just say, just let that person know that you are there for them. You support them. You're not going to judge them no matter what. You're going to be there for them regardless if they go back. I know it can be exhausting. You cannot do that work for them, like you said, but just let them know I'm here for you. And when you're ready, I'm willing to take this on with you. You know, there's so much shame, there's so much sadness, there's so many shitty feelings that we feel. We don't need to hear it from someone else that, oh, this is the shit that you're going through again. Like, how many times are we going to deal with this? We don't need to hear that, especially in the beginning. If they've made the decision to leave, it's so fucking difficult to find the strength within yourself to walk away. So just being able to know that you at least have one person in your corner who's not going to judge you, I think that's so important. And of course, there's so many more steps afterwards, but the most important thing is just to listen and just to know that I'm there for you and I got you. And a piece of advice I'd give for someone who's in it right now, if you're scared to leave, I felt that way too. I know exactly how you're feeling and I understand, but I feel honestly for me, if I didn't leave, I wasn't going to be here. And you have that feeling in your gut that something is off, that something doesn't feel right. Listen to that feeling and honor that feeling, because that was showing up for me a lot prior to when the relationship got physically abusive. There was a point in time towards the end of the relationship that something just felt off. Like my body was telling me something and I chose not to listen to it until my life was almost taken from me. But I just think it's so important for us, especially to listen to that. This relationship is not good for you. You know that he's not going to change or she's not going to change. You know it in your heart and your soul. So please listen to that feeling and talk to someone. Speak up. Like I said before, you only need one person in your life. You only need to speak to one person to let them know what's going on. It's going to be a journey. It's not going to be easy once you leave. I don't want to paint this picture that once you leave, life is fucking great. No, it's not. It's a very difficult process to go through, but your life is so much more important than dealing with the bullshit in this shitty relationship. And you deserve to be treated with love and respect and care. And you deserve to have that for yourself. Find that strength within yourself to be like, I'm going to put myself first. I'm not going to deal with this bullshit anymore because I have enough respect and love for myself that I'm not going to deal with this anymore. So, and honestly, if you don't have anyone in your life, I open myself up to you. Please slide into my DMs. Please send me an email. I'm willing to just be that listening ear. I don't even need to say anything. Just know that you do have at least one person in your corner who's been where you are, and look at where I am now. That can be you too.
Yeah, That's lovely. And having one person in your corner sounds like what everyone needs, that one person that they can turn to. So that was really wonderful advice.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you wanted to share today?
I mean, you guys can check out my podcast. My podcast, it's called Watch Us Thrive. It's available on all major podcast streaming platforms, also on YouTube that you can watch episodes. But I do have a lot of conversations like this, healing from trauma, healing from abuse, healing from things that tried to break us, but look at us now. Just not me sharing my story, also guests that I bring onto my show. And I just encourage you guys to check it out, leave a rating and review, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. If you're a podcaster, you know. But yeah, I really just encourage you guys to use your voice, to speak up, to let go of the shame, and just know that just by sharing your story, you have no idea how many people you can heal, not only yourself, but other people just by speaking your truth. So honor that.
One final question for you. If you could be remembered by one word, what would that word be?
Ooh, I remember one word. Thriver.
Thriver.
Yeah.
Amazing. And what does thriver mean to you?
It means that I'm a bad bitch. No, honestly, being a thriver, someone who's thriving, it just means being me in my full self, showing all the parts of me, the good, the bad, the uncomfortable, the shitty, the great, just really honoring who I am with my scars, with, all the shit that I've gone through, and being proud as fuck of who I've become. I truly believe that right now I am thriving. And by me sharing my story, I'm going to allow others to know that they can also thrive as well, despite the shit that you've gone through. So
wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Lianne. I've really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
this conversation. And I think that, I know it's going to bring someone out there a lot of hope. And
Yes.
hopefully they could find that power within them that you found within you, because it's within us all.
Yes, it is.
So I hope this lands on ears that it needs to. And I'm also going to link in the show notes with a couple of different places that people can reach out to. And you'll also have all of Lianne's contact details and podcast and things like that. So
Yes.
thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope today's conversation inspires and empowers you to know that no matter your current situation, your life can change too. All it takes is a moment. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share it with a friend. If you would like to share your own moment, see the link in the show notes. Until next time, be present in each moment, because you never know when your moment will arrive, or when you have the gift of being a moment for someone else. Take care.